to heal with any kind of relationship issues I'm struggling with, where I should live, what kind of things we struggle with, it seems like he's always there, always enough. I want to talk tonight about something that in the church today, I very seldom hear about it. Okay, I don't hear about the teaching very much, but it was one of the major things that happened with Jesus that I don't hear people talking about it anymore. And I'm thinking, that was a pretty significant thing. How come we don't hear very much teaching about it? It's called the Transfiguration. Because I was reading about Jesus being the light of the world, and I want to read that verse again. It says, "Therefore Jesus spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life." One thing it didn't say was, he who believes in all the laws and rules and regulations, and he who is religious shall not walk in darkness. What did he say? He who follows me. On Thursday nights, we have a Christ-centered recovery program. We put a name to our higher power, and that higher name is? Jesus. Because we follow Jesus, right? It says, he who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. Tonight I want to talk about the light. Last week, for those of you who weren't here, I talked about when he said he's the light of the world, he was referring to Moses, and when they were in the wilderness, and when they went out of Egypt and they crossed the Red Sea, he had the pillar of fire by night and the cloud of light during the day that led them through the wilderness. And because they didn't go into the promised land, it led them around the wilderness for 40 years. And the entire nation, I didn't talk about this, I didn't tell you how big the nation was, about 1 million people or more. And they had the tabernacle in the middle of their community. And so they would have 3 nations on one side, 3 nations on the other side, 3 tribes. 3 tribes on each side. It was 3 tribes. And whenever it was time for them to move, that light would raise up, and the people would pack up all their tents. And when the light moved, you know what the people did? They followed the light. They followed the light. And when the light settled down and stopped over the tabernacle, the people settled, readjusted where their campsites were, about 1 million people, and they followed the light through the wilderness for 40 years. So when Jesus said, I'm the light of the world, he who follows me, he was saying he's just like that light. Except he who follows the light of Christ will never die. And so, literally, he wants us to follow him. Just like that in the wilderness. When he moves, we move. Where he goes, we go. When he says stop, we stop. So when you're having relationship issues and you don't know what to do, what does he say? Follow the light. So get into the Word. Come to church. Go to meetings. Talk to people. Seek the light. Seek his guidance. And he'll show you where to move, who to talk to, what job to get. He'll lead the way. Put your resume out there. See what doors open. It says to follow him. And so, before I get too far off preaching all about John 8:12 again, I want to talk about the Transfiguration. Some of you might be saying, well, Mike, what is the Transfiguration? Okay, the Transfiguration is one of the 5 major things that happened in the life of Christ. He was, of course, we all know that he was born, for those who might not know, I don't want to assume anything. Jesus was born to virgin birth. That's what we celebrate at what day? Christmas. It's not about the lights. Well, although it might be the light of the world. Maybe that's why we put Christmas tree lights on our house, because Jesus is the light of the world. But it's not about all the gifts, although Jesus was a gift to us, the gift of life. But anyway, it's not the commercialism of Christmas. So, okay, that's enough about the birth of Jesus. The 5 major things are the baptism of Jesus, when he was baptized, and the Holy Spirit came on him, and the Father said, this is my Son. The next one was called the Transfiguration, and we're going to read that about that today, where he became white like the sun. right before some of his disciples. And we'll read more details. And then the other three major events are his crucifixion, his death, his burial, and his what? And his resurrection. And there's kind of a sixth one that we haven't seen yet, and that's his return. Have you ever heard, have any of you listened to the news lately? Anyone ever said, it's the times are getting bad and we might be in the end times? I've been hearing about it. And someone I know pretty well who doesn't come very much, he's just freaked out. You watch the news, there's all these storms and the sea's turning red and the world's crazy and this and this and this and this. And I said, okay, so what are you going to do about it? We're going to talk today about what to do about it. So I'm going to read in Matthew chapter 17, verses 1 through 13. And what's cool about this Bible, which was my study Bible, it's called a parallel Bible, so it has the passages of Matthew, Mark, and Luke side by side that tell the story of the Transfiguration. Okay? Look at my time. Let's read. Matthew chapter 17, 1 through 13 in my Bible. And 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John his brother and brought them up to a high mountain by themselves. So who did Jesus have with him? Peter, James, and John. Not Peter, Paul, and Mary. Peter, James, and John, right? And he was transfigured before them, and this is what it says about him being transfigured. And his face shone like the sun, and his garments became as white as light. And so, Eric, how white does it say? Real light. In Mark, it says he became radiant, exceedingly white. No launderer on earth can whiten them. Became radiant as no launderer on earth can whiten them. In other words, more white than any dry cleaner, launderer place can make them white. Okay? That's pretty white, right? In Luke, it says, his face became different and his clothing became white and gleaming. Another one says like lightning. So how white was it? Pretty white. Right? And was it just his clothes? It was his skin, his face. Let's read. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with him. Talking to who? Talking to Jesus. Who was it was with Jesus now? Peter, James, and John. And who else showed up? Moses and Elijah. And we're going to talk a little bit about who Moses and Elijah were and who they are here. And Peter answered and said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 tabernacles here, one for you and one for Moses and one for Elijah. I like Peter. He just puts it out there, whatever he's thinking. And while he was speaking, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them. And behold, a voice out of the cloud saying, This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. What's it say? Listen to him. Listen to him. I was on my way home today, and I'm driving here thinking, listen to him. How do I listen to him? You guys watched the movie War Room? And the guy in the movie the lady in the movie had a war room. Was it pink? To go pray. How many of you talk when you pray? I do. I talk. I talk a lot. You know what I have a hard time doing when I pray? Listening. I do. I have a hard time hearing, right? Sometimes I pray, Lord, Give me. Lord, I'm struggling. Lord, I'm having problems. Show me the way, and I'm leaving. And I have a hard time listening. And I better keep going. And when the disciples heard this, they fell on their faces and were much afraid. And Jesus came to them and touched them and said, Arise and do not be afraid. And lifting up their eyes, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. Now this is the part that kind of intrigues me, and I'm not sure why this part is why he did this. As they were coming down from the mountain, Jesus commanded them, saying, Tell this vision to no one until the Son of Man has risen from the dead. And as his disciples asked him, saying, Why then do the scribes say that Elijah must come first? And he answered and said, Elijah is coming and will restore all things. But I say to you that Elijah already came, and they did not recognize him, but did to him whatever they wished. So also the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands. Then the disciples understood that he had spoken to them about John the Baptist. John the Baptist had already been beheaded. And what was going to happen to the Son of Man? He was going to be crucified. They did whatever they wished to John the Baptist by beheading him. And then it said, this is my old Bible, and that's a picture of my dad and my mom and my kids when they were little. Isn't that cool? Is this on the radio? Wow! Hi, radio fans. I told him if I become famous, then I'll still be his friend. Let's just be honest, though. Let's be honest. He's going to have to do a lot of editing for this to become famous, right? He's going to have to make it sound good. So let's talk about this a minute. The early church kind of referred to this transfiguration as being a foreshadow of what Jesus looked like maybe after he rose from the dead. That when he went to heaven, this is what he was going to look like. He'd be all radiant and white and glorious. And it's interesting to me that Matthew, Mark, and Luke all record this event. And some people say, well, why didn't John, in the other New Testament gospel of the life of Christ, why didn't John record it? John was the last one who wrote, and he had Matthew, Mark, and Luke sitting right in front of him. They were already written. They were well circulated. All the churches had a copy of the gospel of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So they had, the church where John was writing had these letters. So John didn't need to write the same thing. But here's what John wrote, and it's just amazing. When I read this, it was like, John remembers, but he summarized the important things. He said, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Skip a few verses. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory. Glory is of the only begotten, the one and only. No one else was like him from the Father. John was thinking about this, about Jesus and beholding his glory. How light and how bright was the transfiguration? Whiter than anyone has ever gotten laundry. Right? It said he glowed in like the sun. This is one of those things in the Bible that are, see how my friend said it, that was a pastor. He said, this is a descriptive rather than prescriptive narrative. What does that mean? That means he's describing what happened. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John are describing what happened. Is he necessarily saying this is going to happen to you? That if you go up on the mountain and pray that you're going to see a vision of Jesus and his light and Moses and Elijah are going to show up? No. Did Peter write about this? Does Peter remember? You bet. We're going to look at one of his letters. But before we do that, I want to talk about these two other guys. Their names were Moses and Elijah.